Today on All Things 80s, it's Star Wars capes, vinyl versus fabric. Welcome back to All Things 80s. Now, as I've said many times before, that when I was buying Star Wars figures as a child, I was very much focused on getting value for money. And nothing represents better value for money than the addition of a cape. Now, in the early days, the Star Wars figures that came with capes had vinyl capes, and as the series progressed, we ended up getting fabric capes. So in this video, I'm going to take a look at all the figures that came with a cape, give my opinion, and at the end of it, I'm going to tell you if I prefer vinyl or fabric. So let's go ahead and take a look at the figures that came packaged with their own little capes. Okay, so starting with the vinyl caped figures and in the order they were released. So first up we have Princess Leia. Now this is, for me, a really iconic Star Wars figure. It's one of the first that comes to mind when you mention Kenner Star Wars. Now, it really is a piece of white vinyl draped over her shoulders. There's nothing flashy about it, and even on mine you can see one of the issues with vinyl is that it splits rather easily. I've mentioned in another video that Princess Leia's were never a big desire of mine in terms of action figures, because to me it's like a miniature doll. And in terms of value for money, I guess you could say it represents reasonable value for money. You got a blaster and a cape, but this is where it all began. So next up we have Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again, as with Princess Leia, it's a very simple piece of brown vinyl. However, it does its job. Again, this one, when you compare this to, say, a Han Solo, you're getting a weapon and a cape. So it did have something to offer for those of us who were very conscious about getting good value for money. In terms of how well this is kind of aged, I mean, there's certainly no degradation in the vinyl itself, but it is looking dated, but regardless, I still like it. Now, this Darth Vader. Now, Darth Vader was either my first or second Star Wars figure. I honestly can't remember. But I do remember when I had this, I was one of those very bad little boys who managed to lose the cape. And when you see how tightly these are, put over the arms, there's absolutely no excuse for these capes to have been lost. I was extremely stupid in that I probably took it off thinking it was like a different figure without a cape, misplaced it, but I remember my mom made me a replacement using a black trash bag, which I guess served its purpose. But again, very simplistic, but at the same time very effective and extremely iconic. Next up we had the Tusken Raider, and again it's the same overall shape of cape more or less. This time it's like a tan vinyl. It's really hard to imagine these vintage figures, especially the first batch, to come with anything but vinyl. I'm sure there are customizers out there who have probably made fabric capes for these classic vintage Kenners. That is something I would not want. Now we're on to the Empire Strikes Back now with the Hoth Stormtrooper. And given that it's more or less a skirt, I really can't imagine any other way they could have done this. Sure, they could have used fabric, but I think that would have looked quite weird if I'm being honest. But it does its job. The only problem with this figure is, of course, the plastic of the figure is prone to yellowing, whereas the vinyl is not. So you end up whereby your figure and the skirt do not match, which is slightly problematic, but there you go. Now, Lando Calrissian. This one, another, in my opinion, classic, iconic Star Wars figure with this cape. Again, it would look weird if it wasn't made of vinyl, and that's just my opinion, of course, but I always liked this figure as a child. Now this is the only figure in the vinyl lineup that had printed vinyl, Princess Leia Bespin, and it is actually quite a cool looking design. Never had this as a child because it really is just a little doll, but looking at it now, very impressive, and they did a good job with that pattern. Now the last vinyl, I was going to say vinyl caped figure, obviously it's not a cape, but C-3PO with removable limbs did of course come with a vinyl sack, which is a strange choice because obviously a string bag would have been far more, movie accurate. And I'm not really sure the reasoning behind them using vinyl as opposed to string, because I would imagine this would have been slightly more expensive. But regardless, it's still an iconic figure, and it could be argued that this should have come with Chewbacca and not C-3PO himself. But anyway, those were the vinyl figures, or the vinyl caped figures and vinyl accessory figures that Kenner gave us. And we're going to move on to the fabric capes next, and you'll see how basically there are twice as many figures came with fabric as came with vinyl. So now we're looking at the figures that came with fabric capes. And the first one, of course, is the Jawa, which, as you all know, originally came with a vinyl cape, but it was deemed that the vinyl did not represent good value for money, so it was upgraded to a fabric cloth, which I understand the reasons for doing so, but as a result, the sculpt of the figure gets completely obscured, and it doesn't look that great to me, if I'm being honest. I'm not a huge fan of this cloth caped Jawa, but given the prices of a vinyl caped Jawa, I will make perfectly good with a cloth caped Jawa. The next one to get released was Master Yoda, which, despite its small size, came absolutely packed with accessories. So in addition to the fabric cape, we get the belt, the snake, and the cane. And this is a really, really nice cloak that he's wearing. The fabric, it's got a really nice feel to it. As I said before, never had Yoda as a child, but seeing him now, this is a fantastic little figure. And the next cloth caped or aproned figure is the Ugnaught. Now this is an interesting apron. From the front it looks great, but it has a tendency to come unravelled as mine has done, and just leave a real mess. There should have been a better way of producing this so that it didn't result in the bow coming off like this. So I'll need to fix that later. But if you notice something here, the first three figures to come with fabric capes were all the tiniest figures. So Kenner obviously realised that children like me would not be spending their pocket money on such a small figure unless there was some additional items added to it to sort of give it slightly more value for money. However, they really outdid themselves next with Forlom, which was the last figure in the Empire line to come with a fabric cape or cloak, coat in this case. But not only did he come with this pleather type coat, which is pretty cool, he also came with this really interesting sort of chest armor, backpacky type thing as well. So you're getting the fabric cape, blaster, and this interesting body armor type thing. I absolutely loved this figure as a child. One of my favorites actually, because it just represented, at the time, probably the most value for money in a figure. Very happy with this. Interesting that they never actually repeated this type of fabric again in the line, but that was Forlom, who has just dropped his blaster. So next up, another figure that came pretty much packed with value, Bib Fortuna. So this is a very interesting material, suede-like actually, and the only figure in the line to have this suede material, which is very, how do I say, it's got a very sort of, god damn it, my brain's gone numb here, like sort of a very sort of suave type, suede elegance to it. Interestingly, under the coat, there is a waistband which, provided you don't lose the coat, you will never see, which is an interesting choice. Perhaps it could go over the coat, but I don't think it really should. But regardless, this is another figure, aside from being quite a tall figure, so we've got the staff, the suede coat, and this sort of body piece, which I think has a tab at the back. Yeah, like a belt type thing. Again, this is another of these figures that you see naked on the used market, and it breaks my heart to think that some child has gone out of his way to remove all of this and then lose it again. But Bib Fortuna, very cool figure. Now this one is really nice, the Emperor's Royal Guard, which I think, now don't quote me on this, but I think this might have been my first ever, no, I'm lying, because Forlorn was my first ever non-vinyl caped figure. So this would have been my second ever fabric figure. And this is again is another classic, which, as we all know, is not just one but two separate cloth accessories on it. Another figure again, you'll see quite often everything is missing, which obviously took a bit of effort to get all these capes off. But you know, children being children are curious and they want to see what it's like with the cape off. Once they get it off, they misplace it, it gets lost. And the figures without capes, that should have capes, just look terrible in my opinion. Klaatu is very interesting. This skirt, where no two look the same, it's got a bit of everything. It's got a bit of faux fur, faux leather. Wow, it's got a lot, this one. I never particularly liked the look of this, if I'm being honest. I have a tendency to like symmetry, and with this, you know, being cut at a weird angle, it always bothered me. And in fact, this one is actually bothering me right now, so I'm going to put this one down. The Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight figure. Now this one, I've shared a video highlighting my experience as a child with this figure. The figure I had as a child actually had the snap cape. This one is not, so if at all possible, I would like to get a snap cape for this figure. But again, this was probably, at the time, was the best value Luke Skywalker figure, because we've got the cape, lightsaber, and blaster, which is all excellent. So for me, sadly, if you saw my story, the Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight that I had as a child was missing the lightsaber and blaster because it had been resealed. But because I wanted the figure so badly, I had to put up with the fact that I never had the original lightsaber and blaster. But anyway, nice figure. Squidhead, Squidhead is another exceptional value for money figure. If we look here, we've got two different types of fabric. We've got the underskirt, the cloak, but also a waistband made of plastic and a blaster. So this was a really good figure if you're looking for value for money. And it looks like a fantastic looking figure, especially when it's complete like this. Again, another figure you will see for sale, missing everything, and it just looks terrible without the accessories. But with accessories, it's a great, great looking figure. Next up, we had the Han Solo in his trench coat. Now, by this point in time, back in the 80s, I was no longer into Star Wars, so I was never aware of this figure as a child. Had I still been collecting, I would have been all over this. This is a great looking figure. It's actually one of the better sculpts, both in terms of head and body of Han Solo, although it is pretty much hidden by his coat. Very nice looking trench coat. Again, a figure you'll often see missing that coat, but this is one of the few caped figures that doesn't look too bad without his coat, so that's one there. Next up, Princess Leia with her poncho. Now this one is really, really good value for money. So in addition to the poncho, we've got a little rubber belt, blaster, and removable helmet. So this one had the lot. I'm thinking that had I still been buying Star Wars at this point in time, I probably would have gone for this Princess Leia just because of all the sort of extra little bonus pieces you get with it. The cape or the poncho itself got a really nice feel to it, and I believe this is a really common figure actually, and I believe there are some unscrupulous sellers on eBay who try to use this poncho on the last 17 look poncho figure, but as we'll get to that shortly, you'll see they are completely different colors. Prune Face is a pretty unimpressive figure overall, and the cape is especially unimpressive. It just doesn't sit at all well, and it's not at all well made in my opinion. I guess that's slightly better like that. But yeah, interesting figure. Barely any screen time, blink and you'll miss him. And the most un-Star Wars-like weapon you'll probably ever see on an action figure. But, it's Prune Face, that's all I can say really. Now we're into last 17 territory with the Lando Calrissian General. This is a very flashy looking cape, very sort of silky, shiny on the backside. I guess it serves its purpose. It does look quite impressive actually. And again, this is one that to remove the cape, you really had to stretch it over his head. So there's no excuse for these being missing, but as you know, tons of Lando General are for sale without his cape. I guess if you're handy with a knitting needle, you can probably, not a knitting needle, but a needle and thread, I should say, you can probably fabricate your own one if you really wanted to complete your figure. And finally, the last figure to be released with fabric was Luke Skywalker with his Endor poncho. Now, unlike Princess Leia, his helmet is not removable, which is a shame, but the poncho itself looks alright, as you can see, quite different in colour to the Leia poncho. Value for money, pretty much, poncho, belt and blaster, although, on Endor he did actually use the green lightsaber, so it would have been nice to have had that with the lightsaber. And an interesting point to note is that underneath the poncho is the final duel costume. So to make a really good looking Jedi Knight, some people do remove the heads from this and switch it with the Jedi Knight head and remove the poncho, and you're left with a really good looking final duel Luke Skywalker. A pretty expensive way to make a custom, but it does look good if I'm being honest. So yeah, again, this is where Kenner made some really bizarre decisions. So they've proven they can do the removable helmet with Leia. Had they done the removable helmet on this one, it would have made an instant final duel Luke Skywalker, so it was like two figures in one. But again, who knows what they were thinking back then. So those were the caped Star Wars figures. And as I sort of alluded to when looking at the figures, there's something quite magical about the vinyl cape. It was very simplistic, and for me especially, when you mention Star Wars figures, the first figures that come into my head are those, like Darth Vader, Princess Leia with the white gown. There's just something quite iconic about those vinyl capes. However, as the line got progressively more advanced, some of these fabric capes are quite impressive, and they certainly did represent really good value for money, especially when there were some figures getting removable helmets, rubber belts, etc. So all in all, if I had to pick one, I'm going to pick vinyl purely because of the iconic nature of those vinyl capes. That's not to say the fabric capes aren't good, because they certainly are. So please let me know in the comments, do you prefer the vinyl capes or the fabric capes? So thank you all for watching, with special thanks to the Patreons. Please like, please subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos from All Things 80s.